and talk about whatever you need. So, but we're going to talk about goats tonight. Can you all see my screen? Thumbs up. Has a goat on it. It says goats with a barn. Cool. Okay. So we're going to talk about goats tonight. First things first is that to be able to show at the county fair or state shows, you have to be registered with 4-H. So make sure that you get on 4-H onto Z Suites and you register for the year. So every year that resets. So you have to re-register every year. There's like a $10 fee to register. And once you're registered, then like she said, you have to maintain your membership. So you have to be a member in good standing and have these 2 courses to keep your membership active and in good standing. If you're high school age, then you can also join you can join FFA instead of 4-H. The next thing that I think is super important is we need to understand the rules. So how many of you have read the rules for the Utah State Livestock Show, junior livestock shows? 1. So I would encourage all of you. They're not very fun to read, but they're super important and they have a lot of important information in them. There's a website down here, or it's on your extension, usually on your extension Facebook, or not Facebook page, but your extension website. Or you can just Google Utah Junior Livestock Shows and you can find the rules for those state sanctioned shows. But they have tons of good information. They have tagging dates, they have ages, they have weights, they have their drug policy, they have their showmanship ages that are required, they have their codes of conduct. So there's a lot of good information in there that you want to make sure you're familiar with, so that you don't run into any trouble when you go to show your animals. Next, once you are registered with 4-H, once you know the rules, the next step is to take the plunge, right? So to think about the kind of animal you want to show. In this case, we're going to show goats. And then there's a couple of things to do to start thinking about before you go purchase your animal. You want to develop a budget or think about a budget. So how much is the price of your animal? How much are materials if you have to build them a house or a pen? How much is the price of feed? What supplies do you need and how much are those going to cost? And then what kind of veterinary care or extra expenses do you think that you'll have? A budget's super important because these things can get pretty expensive pretty fast. And if you don't think about that, sometimes you don't have enough money to buy the food that you need for the whole time, or you don't have enough money to buy the supplies you need to build their pens or their houses. So to think about these things before we actually go buy an animal is super important. And it's kind of like a business model, right? When you guys grow up and go into business, these are kind of things that we have to think about. We have to budget and we have to plan, and it's kind of just a step in helping learn important skills in life. So once we understand our budget and we have a budget on how much money we think we can spend on an animal, then it's finding a breeder. So find a breeder. There are breeders in your town, there are breeders in your county, there are breeders statewide. There are breeders all across the country that grow or that raise goats for livestock shows. So finding a breeder that fits in your budget and that has the style and the kind of animal that you want to show. In this case, probably a weather goat, a boar meat goat. And so one thing you can do is you can ask people, your friends, who they got their goats from. You can ask your leaders who they think are good people to buy goats from. You can ask, you can look up who won the state show last year, who won the vernal show last year, and you can ask them where they got their animal. Usually the price of goats is anywhere from $300 to thousands and thousands of dollars. I think there's been goats that have sold on some big online sales lately for $10,000 and $15,000. So you can, there's all different kinds of goats and they're all different kinds of prices, just depending on what your budget is. And that's super personal and it's going to vary person to person. So if your budget's $300, that's fine. If your budget's $3,000, that's fine. It's totally dependent on you and your family. So once we know where we're going to get our animal, and maybe what our budget is, we have to think about housing for our animals. So when we bring our animal home, where are we going to put it? what are some important things? You guys can probably read it on my slide, but what are some important things that we have to protect our animals from?
We have to protect our animals from too much cold because then they could freeze and die.
Yep, exactly. Especially right now, huh? What else?
Safety.
Safety, yeah. Safety from what do you think?
Getting hurt.
Yeah, getting hurt. What else can we protect them from? What about in the summertime? Too much sun, too much heat? Can they overheat?
Protecting them from like coyotes and stuff.
Coyotes, yep, and even neighbor dogs, right? Yeah, good ideas and good suggestions. So yeah, when just everything that you would want to be protected from, right? Wind, rain, sun, dogs, coyotes, sharp, pointy objects. I mean, anything you think that could hurt them. So those are all things that we want to check and make sure that the area is free of. You can see in that picture, these gates, these panels, this is our barn, and this was built for, these panels were built for horses originally. And our sheep, they can't fit through these brown bars, but the goats, they fit through the brown bars. So we had to go buy some extra panels and kind of zip tie them up there because the goats would just squeeze through and we'd come out and they'd be running all over the barn. So we had to kind of goat proof things, and goats are a little tougher to goat proof things than sheep are. So they can fit through really, really small cracks. And then they get out and they're hard to catch sometimes, huh? So housing, so we need to make sure they have good place to stay for the summer. And then we need to think about feed. So what are we going to feed them? We know where we're going to buy them. We know where we're going to house them. Now, what are we going to feed them? There are all different kinds of feeds. And I think, how many feed stores do you guys have in your area that you can think of? Where do you guys normally buy your feed?
We usually buy from IFA, I guess.
IFA, yep, that's a pretty big feed store in Utah, huh?
Snyder's in Colorado.
Snyder's, yep, that's a good feed place too. So there are lots of different kinds of feeds. So you want to make sure the things that I think about when I'm buying feeds for my animals or trying to find a feed for my animal is, where do I buy it? Can they get it if they run out? How fast can they get it? Because if you have to switch feed, sometimes that can be pretty hard on your animal. So if you're feeding a certain kind of feed and you run out and you have to go buy a different kind of feed, sometimes that can give them some pretty bad stomach aches and diarrhea and things like that, and then they'll stop eating. So you want to try to keep them on the same food as long as you can throughout. Like, we try to keep ours on the same food their whole life. So if the supplier runs out, how fast can they get it? Some stores can get it the next day. Some stores take 2 or 3 weeks. So if they were to run out and you didn't have food for 2 or 3 weeks, then you'd have to switch food, and then your animal stops eating, then it stops gaining weight. And then we worry about making weight for fair, right? So availability. What is your breeder feed? So what did the person who you bought your animal feed their animals, feed their goats? And sometimes they have suggestions on where you can buy that. I would always suggest getting a little bit of their feed and mixing it into what you're feeding so we don't cause stomach issues. And again, how much are we going to feed? How long do we need to feed it? And how many are we going to feed? So those all kind of play into availability and the costs of the feed. When do most of you get your goats? Anybody have their goats yet?
February, March.
Yeah, do you have your goat yet? Did you pick it out already? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What about the rest of you? Have anybody else picked out their goats yet?
I've picked out, I have my one goat, but I'm actually going to get another goat this Thursday, actually.
Nice. So you're going to be feeding 2 goats, right? So that's twice as much feed. So you're going to feed them now until your show's in June, right? June. So how many months is that?
4.
4. So we have the rest of March, April, May, and yep, part of June. So probably 3.5 to 4 months is how long we're going to feed them. Does anybody know how much we feed a goat? We're going to talk about this a little later, but here's a little quiz for you. Think about how much you feed a goat. Do we just feed them whatever they want as much as they want? That'd be pretty expensive, wouldn't it? Sometimes it's okay to feed them as much as they want when they're really little and you're trying to get them to gain weight, but most of the time we try to manage their feeding. So, I just threw in, this is obviously not a goat, but these are just some little, inspirational quotes. So never hope for more than you work for. So that means, what does that mean? What does it mean to never hope for more than you work? Are you gonna,
Oops, sorry.
go ahead.
Basically, you don't want to hope for a super good animal when you don't put a lot of effort into it. If you put a lot of effort into it, I mean, it could still be a bad animal, but it has a lot more potential to be a better animal.
Exactly. Good job. Exactly. So our next thing we think about when we talk about budget is vet care. How many of you have ever had to take your goat to the vet? I've had to take my goat to the vet. So sometimes things happen and we just have to take them to the vet. Most of the time our animals should come with all of their vaccinations. So that's something that you'll want to ask your breeder, is make sure that your goat is up to date on its shots, and also ask them when the last time it was dewormed. So those are both important things to know when you pick up your animal, is if its vaccines are current and when was it dewormed, because you'll want to deworm it throughout its kind of life with you. And we'll talk about that in a minute too. But there's other things that happen, emergencies. So what if your animal runs through the field and it gets caught on a little piece of wire and it gets a big, huge gash and it has to go have stitches? What if you take it to the dynamite jackpot and you come home and it gets ringworm? Those are all things that need a vet and need medication and need some treatment to be able to fix them or clear them up so that you can show them at your county show. So those are all extra costs that we have to be aware of. So make sure you know a vet in your area that actually treats goats, because a lot of vets, like dog and cat vets, they don't treat goats. So you have to find a vet that knows what they're doing with the goat. And even if you just write their number on a little sticky note and stick it on your fridge, you might never need it, but if you have an emergency, at least you know a quick and easy way to get a hold of a vet that can treat your goat. You guys probably won't ever have to give vaccinations or injections, but sometimes you might have to give medication or something like that if your goat gets sick. And so we'll just talk about some of the locations that we give vaccinations or injections. So you can see on this goat, he has a little red triangle. Is this his show side or his off show side?
This is his off show side, right?
Correct. Why would we want to give a vaccination on the off show side?
Because if it's on the show side, there might be like spots that show where the injection was placed, and so it would look ugly, and the judge doesn't want that. Nope.
It'll be more noticeable.
Yep, exactly. And a lot of times the booster that the vaccination that they get, the CDT that they get when they're babies, leaves a bump forever. And so we put it right inside that armpit, and right just inside the armpit so that you can't see it. And if we do see it, it's on the off show side, so it's not as noticeable. What about if we have to give a shot or a not a vaccination, but a medication in the muscle? Do we want to give a big shot right in this big rump area down here?
No.
Why not? What are we raising? Ultimately, what are we raising? What are these animals ultimately?
Show goats.
Say that again?
Show goats.
Yeah, but where are they going to end up?
At the butcher.
At the butcher, right. What do you think most important parts of the animal are?
The muscles.
Their loins and
Yep, and this rump roast right here and the shoulder roast right here, right? So we don't want to taint those muscles with medication. So if you were to stick a needle in there and push a bunch of medication in there, you're going to ruin part of that muscle that the medication touches sometimes. So usually when we give a shot in the muscle, we usually give it in the neck, because not a lot of people eat that neck meat and there's not a lot there. So if your vet ever gives an injection in the neck, you know why now, is because we're trying not to ruin the high quality cuts of meat that this animal is ultimately going to produce. Dewormer. So where do goats get worms?
From a dirty environment.
Yes, sometimes. Sometimes they can get them from their mom. A lot of times sheep and goats and cows just get them from grass. So a lot of times intestinal parasites, they're very common. Almost every livestock animal and most pets have intestinal parasites. And it's usually in the soil and in the grass. So when they eat grass that has a parasite on it, then they'll get the parasite and the parasite will live in their body. So we deworm our animals. Does anyone know what an intestinal parasite does? Why is it bad for a goat?
It can
Their blood.
Sometimes, yeah. What else? What are we trying to do with our goats? We buy them when they're little and we try to make them
bigger, and those worms can they can not only damage the inside, but they can also make the animal like less hungry, and they just start shrinking almost.
And don't look good for the stock show.
yeah, because they
They
take all of
will lose all their fat and they won't gain any muscle.
yeah, because they're taking all of their nutrients, right? They're taking all the goat's gonna eat and eat and eat and eat, but if it has lots of worms in its tummy, then those worms are gonna take all the nutrients and the goat's not gonna have anything left to put fat and to put muscle on himself. So we deworm. Check with your vet. So ask your breeder when the last time they were dewormed, and then check with your vet or even your breeder and ask them how often they deworm and what they recommend deworming with. So these are just a bunch of different kinds of dewormers. Right now you can buy these at IFA, but come June 1st, you have to have a vet's prescription to be able to buy any of these medications. So make sure you have a relationship with your veterinarian, because if you go to the store in June or in May, I guess in June, your animal's probably not going to be deworming much in June, but after June, if you go to the store to buy this, they're going to ask you for a prescription. So you have to have a relationship with your veterinarian to be able to buy any kinds of medication starting in June. So withdrawal period. Does anybody know what a withdrawal period is? Has anybody ever heard that term before?
Yeah, so what I'm pretty sure it is, it's so once you give a medication to an animal, you need to have them have a period where they can withdraw from the medication, because you don't want them to have it on the medication until like show day, because that's gonna have some really weird results on the animal.
Right. So remember, we talked about what are these animals destined for? What's their ultimate goal? After show day. After show day, where are they going?
To be somebody's dinner.
Be somebody's dinner. Do you want to eat the dewormer? I don't want to eat the dewormer. So we have what is called a withdrawal period. So every single medication that we medicate our animals with, whether they're sick or whether it's just a dewormer, has a withdrawal period. So you can see this right here on this label, and they'll all have it on the label. So if you're going to give your animal some kind of medication, you want to make sure you have this withdrawal period. You know when it is. So it says goats must not be slaughtered for food within 6 days following treatment. So what does that mean? How long do we have before show day? So they have to be drug-free on show day. So how many days before show day do we have?
6.
6, right. So make sure you know, if you ever treat your animal with anything, you know the withdrawal period. Okay, so we've thought about everything we need to get our goat. Now we're going to go pick out our goat. What do we look for when we pick out a good show goat?
A straight back.
A straight back, yep. What else?
Good boned.
Good boned, right? The bigger bones, the better. Yep.
Muscle.
Lots of muscle, right? We are showing show animals. So, and that's what the most important part of a market animal is the muscle, right?
Also lots of drive.
Yep. Yeah, drive.
No,
Drive you can sometimes teach. So most of the time you can teach them, but yeah, so muscle, bone, structure, back. Yep.
no genetic diseases.
Right. So you don't want them to have 5 legs, right? That's probably a bad deal. Sometimes we can have animals that have what's called parrot mouth. Does anybody know what parrot mouth is? That's a common genetic malformation that we see. It's not terrible, but it's not ideal. Parrot mouth is when the top jaw comes way, way over the bottom jaw. So sometimes they have a hard time eating because their jaws don't line up. But really we're looking for structure. We're looking that they walk with straight legs. They don't limp. Their legs don't turn in. Their legs don't turn out. Their knees don't touch. Their knees aren't bowed out. Their legs are straight. They walk smoothly. Their back isn't really dipped down. Their back isn't really hunched up. They have enough muscle that we think we can, when they're babies, it's kind of hard to tell because we're going to build that muscle as we feed them. We look for rib shape. Does anybody know what rib shape is? So when we look down at the top of a goat, we have its head and its neck and then its ribs, right? So the bigger and the rounder its ribs are, the better that is for show day. Muscle and balance. We talked about all of those. So here's a couple of pictures of things we do and things we don't want. So these are sheep legs, but it's the same within goats. We talked about straight legs. So you can see where that green check is. Those legs are very straight. They come off the shoulder and they come straight down to the ground and straight through the hoof. The second picture, you can see those little hoofs. They're like turned out. So we don't want animals that toe out. So that's called toed out. The next picture, they're toed in. We don't want animals that toe in. So look at their feet and look at their legs when you're picking out your animal. The last animal in that one has some knock knees, so its knees are really turned in. So when it goes to walk, it's not going to walk really pretty and smooth like a judge wants it to. And then this is what you're looking for from the side view. You want them to come straight down off the shoulder. You don't want them back too far. You don't want their pasterns or their hooves too far out in front of them. Again, some knee issues. And then again, you have the same kind of thing in the rear. You want their legs to come right off their hip bones. You don't want them knocked out. You don't want them knocked in. And then this picture of the goat down here is just kind of some terms you might have heard a judge say if you've ever listened to a judge judge a thing. So number one, it's kind of this back end butt muscle rump roast right here. So the turn to the leg. The turn to the leg is that muscle, that back end rump roast muscle that we want really big and really expressive in our show animals. And kind of the same, as much as you want it to curve on the back, you kind of want them to curve out the side too. So this one line that comes out the side is kind of that same structure coming off the side. Number two, it says expressive of rack. Does anybody know what that is? We actually just talked about it in the last slide. What does expressive of rack mean? The rib shape. So the rack is the rack of ribs, right? So expressive rack means you want that big, round, opened up rib shape. You don't want an A. So if you look at the top of the goat, you don't want its spine to be here and then its ribs to come down like a teepee. You want them to be more like a table. Okay. So when you look down at the top of the goat, you want its spine to be here and then you want its shoulders and its rib to kind of make more like a square instead of a teepee. Fullness of loin, that's the area kind of between the last rib and the hip. So you don't want that sunk in. You want to try and get that as full as you can. So when you look down your goat, the smallest point on the goat should be the shoulder, and then it should progressively get wider as you get to the pins or the hips. So you want your animal to kind of look like a triangle where its head is up here and its back end is down where my thumbs are. So you want it to be narrowest at the shoulder and widest at the hips. Forearm is that front muscled arm. So you want it to kind of have big, round front muscled arms. Depth and spring of rib, we kind of already talked about. And then base of width or width of base. That's how far apart their legs stand. Do we want a goat that's legs touch like this when it's standing there? No, we want them to try to be as wide as we can get them, right? So they want to look like little bulldogs. I always like a little goat that looks like a bulldog. You want a big, wide, open chest. So those are just some things to look for when you go to look for your baby. So champions don't show up to get everything they want. They show up to give everything they have. So we pick out our goat and we bring it home. We talked about sticking with the feed. So try to stick with the feed from the day you bring it home until the day you sell it at the sale. Changing feeds can lead to lots of issues. We can have stomach upset. We can lose weight. just diarrhea, things we don't want to have to deal with. So if we can pick the same feed and feed a show-based feed, that'll be the best thing. So I actually didn't change this weight right here, but this is a sheep weight. So most lambs when they're weaned, or goats when they're weaned, are 35 to 45, maybe 50 pounds when they're weaned. Usually probably around 35 to 40. But when they're little and tiny, and if they're really skinny, you can pretty much feed them what they want for a couple of weeks until they start looking good and they start filling out and they start kind of putting on some weight. And then once they start putting on some weight, you want to feed them about 3 to 4% of their body weight. So 3.5 to 4% of their body weight is going to make them gain weight. 3% of their body weight is going to make them maintain weight. So if your goat is really small and you're afraid you're not going to make weight at the fair, then you might want to feed 4%. If your goat's right where it's at and you don't want it to gain a whole bunch more weight, you want to feed it 3% of its body weight. Do you guys know how to figure out percentages? Have you learned that in math? Yes, no, kind of. So you take their weight. So you're going to have to, you got to weigh them. So their scales, I think, does Uinta County have access to scales, or some of the counties around have access to scales with Extension?
Yeah, we at our tagging, we
Okay.
can weigh them.
So if everybody weighs their animal at tag in, and then sometimes if you have a good relationship with your vet, you can call the vet and say, hey, can I come weigh my goat? And sometimes they'll let you weigh your goats, or if you know somebody with a scale. We like to weigh our animals weekly. That's how often we change our animals' feed, is we change our animals' feed every week, depending on how much they weigh and where we want them to be. So 3%. So you would just take the weight of your goat. Say your goat weighs 50 pounds. You would take 50 pounds and you would times it by 0.03. And that would give you how much food that animal is supposed to eat per day. We like to feed our animals twice a day. So say, let's see, let me get my calculator out. So we do 50 pounds and we times it by 0.03. That gives us 1.5. Oh, you can't see it probably, there's too much glare. 1.5 pounds of feed per day. So that's the total amount of feed that your goat is supposed to eat. I like to feed my goat twice a day. So I take that and I divide it by 2, and that gives me 0.75, or 3/4 pound of feed. Some feed cups you get have measured lines on it that tell you how much the feed weighs. Or you can go to Walmart and for $10 or $12, you can buy a little kitchen scale and you set your feed cup on it and zero it out. And then you pour 3/4 cup of feed in it and you feed that twice a day. So I think it's super important that we know how much our animals are eating and how much they weigh, so that we can keep track and make sure that we get animals to weight at the fair. Because it's really frustrating for kids when they've spent 4 months feeding an animal and they show up to fair day and they don't weigh enough to show. So it's an easy thing to do to make sure we maintain and gain weight, and that we make weight the day we get to the fair.
I have one question for you.
Yep.
How much is the required weight for the goats to be able to show?
That's a great question for your extension office. Cheyenne.
I'll look it up real quick.
Okay.
But Josie
Cheyenne
has a
will-
question too.
Who had another question? Maybe Cheyenne did.
Josie has her hand up.
Oh,
I don't know
Josie.
if she still has
Josie,
a
sorry, I
question.
didn't see that.
How do you weigh your goat?
So the extension will weigh them for you when you tag them. And then sometimes your 4-H leader will have a scale. Sometimes the breeders in your area will have a scale. Your veterinarian will have a scale. So there's scales around that you could always haul your goat to and see how much your goat weighs. You can buy a scale. I bought my scale. I think I bought our scale on Amazon. We just bought a dog scale. It was a little bit expensive. It was a couple $100, but we're going to show for a really long time. And to us, knowing how much our animal weighs is really important. So we spent $180 on a scale and we use it every week. It's in our barn and we just put our animal on it and they learn how to stand on the scale and we can weigh them. So, but there should be some people in your area that probably have scales also if you don't have access to one. Yeah, there's somebody else with their hand up on the screen, but I can't see your name, so.
What if your goat gets sick a day before the show?
If your goat gets sick the day before the show, I guess it depends on how sick it is. If it's sick and it's laying down and not moving and not doing well and looks terrible, then you probably aren't going to be able to show it. If it's sick as in it just stopped eating and it normally eats really good, then you're probably okay. Take some extra hay with you. So that's one thing we haven't talked about is hay. We talked about grain and weighing grain, but hay is also super, super important for goats because you know what kind of animal they are? Do you know what kind of stomach system a goat has? Does anybody know? So they're what we call rumen animals. So goats should weigh 45 pounds. That's the minimum weight for Uinta Basin. So goats are what we call a rumen animal. So do you know how many stomachs a rumen animal has? Anybody? Anybody?
4.
3 or 4. Yep. 4.
4.
Yep. So we feed hay because the hay keeps the rumen functioning. So if you don't feed hay and you just feed grain, sometimes our rumen can stop functioning and that animal can't digest its food. So you feed hay so that it scratches the inside of its stomach and it makes the rumen keep functioning. So hay is an important part of a goat's diet. Do we feed a lot of hay to goats? What happens if we feed a lot of hay to goats? Does anyone know?
I think it scratches up their stomachs too much.
No, not quite. It makes them look really, really fat. So we get what we call a hay belly on goats when they eat too much hay, and they almost look pregnant because they get such a big, huge fat belly. So we don't feed a lot of hay to show goats because we don't want them to look really fat when we go to show them. So we feed like a handful of hay in the morning and a handful of hay at night. And if they get diarrhea or they're not eating very good, we kind of pull the grain off. We give them a little bit more hay for a couple of days, and then we swap it. When they start eating good and feeling better, we give them the regular amount of grain they should have, and then their handful of hay. So you can kind of mess with it back and forth while you're feeding them, but leading up to the day of the show, about 3 or 4 days before the show, you're not going to want to feed them a lot of hay because they'll get really fat and bloated looking. We don't want a bloated sheep or a bloated goat. Josie.
I didn't know my hands were up.
Oh, okay. Are there any more questions on feeding?
Nope.
No. Okay. We will go to the next slide. We kind of already talked about this. We fed a 40-pound animal versus a 70-pound animal. When you get to 45 pounds, you're probably going to want to be pushing an animal to gain some weight. So they're not in the lightweight class. You probably want them right in the middle somewhere, 70, 60, 70, 80 pounds, 90 pounds. That's kind of a market-sized goat, middle weight goat. And so if you're wanting to gain weight, remember that 3.5 to 4%. Once you get to like 70, 75 pounds, you probably just want to start feeding or 80 pounds, you probably want to start feeding the 3%. They're still going to gain weight, but they're not going to gain a lot of weight really fast. So you won't be too fat for the show. If you have questions on feeding and weights and things like that, feel free to reach out to me or Cheyenne or any of your agents or your coordinator or your 4-H leaders, and some of them can help explain feeding a little bit better if you're interested in learning more about maintaining feed. Sarah.
So what about like salt and mineral?
So yes, salt and mineral is important. A lot of the show feeds that we feed have all of those minerals and nutrients in them. So if you're feeding a really well-balanced show feed, you don't necessarily need the salt and mineral, but I think the goats like it and it never hurts if you just feed it. Like a lot of times for goats, you can just have a free choice salt or mineral supplement that they can eat when they feel like they need it. And that's fine too, yeah. does anybody, real quick, does anybody know the difference between a sheep feed and a goat feed? There's one big difference.
Goat feed has copper in it.
Goat feed has copper in it. And what's wrong with copper for sheep?
It's toxic. It'll
It's
kill 'em.
toxic. Yep. So your goats can eat your sheep food, but your sheep can never eat your goat food or it will kill them. Copper is very toxic to sheep, but it's an essential mineral for goats. So goat feed has copper in it. So we don't want to feed goat feed to sheep. So just if you have both animals, just make sure you know that. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about training. Can you show in a halter or a collar at Uinta Basin? Or does it just have to be a halter?
They can do either.
They can do either. Okay. So halters are definitely easier to start training your animal. We use sheep halters when we're very first starting to lead and tie them and pull them around. When we're showing, we use more of this leather with a chain halter. As you progress and get better with your showmanship, I would encourage you all to try a collar, because a collar just makes your animal look better. I think that you can present your animal easier. There's not as much going on in your hands when you have a collar. You don't have to worry about the leash and the ears and the neck and everything all at once. You just kind of have a collar that you hold with your pinkies, and you set your goat and you hold the ears, and you don't have to worry about everything else. So as you're starting out, these halters are fabulous, but you're going to want to make sure the day of the show you have one of these kind of nicer, cleaner leather chain type goat halters. Don't walk in with a sheep rope nylon halter. That's just not really a great presentation. So try to get this show type halter. And it's a little bit better for keeping the goat's chin up while you walk it and neck up. Halter breaking is hard in goats. Goats are stubborn, right? Does anybody have a stubborn goat? I have stubborn goats. Goats are stubborn. The easiest thing I think I have ever found with halter breaking goats is to get an animal that's already halter broke, or let your dogs outside and let them follow you, because then the goat's going to want to be next to you. And as long as your dogs don't bite your goat, if your dogs bite your goat, don't let your dogs out with your goat. But if your dogs are just kind of running around and will follow you and help you, then that's a way to halter break them. Does anybody else have any good ideas for halter breaking goats? What are your tricks? I think you're on, Jameson, you're on mute. Are you telling me a trick? Oh, does anybody have a trick for halter breaking stubborn goats? No?
Just drag them.
Yeah, just drag them. Yep. So eventually they'll learn how to walk. One thing that we teach is pressure release. So you pull, and as soon as they take a step, you release that pressure. So it's like a reward for them. So you pull and you pull and you pull, and they move their foot and you release the pressure. So that's like a positive reinforcement for a goat. So you pull and they move and you release. And pretty soon they're like, whoa, well, if I move, they're not going to yank on me. So kind of that positive reinforcement training works well with goats, I think. But in the end, they're really just stubborn. Then bracing. We talked a little about bracing a little while ago, right? So why do we brace our animals?
To get them used to this
Stance
for the stock show.
Right. And it helps express their muscle, right?
Pop
So
their muscles.
yep, to pop their muscles. Yep. So their muscles get hard. It's just like when you're flexing your muscles, right? Your muscles are big and bulging and they're hard, and it looks better than a floppy arm, right? So bracing. So here you can see, this is my son Ryder. He's bracing this goat. He's putting his leg into its chest. He has his neck up. He has his nose flat, and he's pushing some pressure against the neck of that goat to get it to brace. When we start teaching our baby goats how to brace, we lift their front ends up off the ground a little bit, and we kind of like sit them on their butt. So a goat doesn't want to sit down really on its butt. So if you go to like sit it on its butt, on its back end, it's going to push towards you. And so that's how we teach our goats to brace. Everybody has different ways of teaching goats to brace. Does anybody have any tricks for how they teach their goats to brace? No tricks. Goats are stubborn, huh? But yeah, we sit our goats on their butt. So we go to just kind of pick their front end up, not necessarily by their head and neck, but even if you got to put a hand under their chest, but we just kind of pick them up and sit them on their butt and they're going to push. Or you can pick their front feet up. Another way I've seen it done is you can pick their front feet up and back them in little teeny tiny circles. So you just kind of turn them in a little circle and pretty soon they're just going to start pushing on you. And then when they start pushing on you, kind of just hold them there for a minute and then release it and then do it again. And you hold it for a little bit longer and you release it and you hold it for a little bit longer and you release it. And pretty soon they just know that when you push on them, they push back. Here's a little video. So this goat in this picture, this gal was helping Ryder. We were having some troubles getting him to brace. He wasn't bracing very well. So in this picture, she's kind of just messing with this goat, kind of getting him to brace a little better. And just see how she kind of picked his front feet up off the ground a little. He wants to keep moving these back legs. So she's going to pick his front feet off the ground a little and push him back and just kind of get him to push. So this goat's older, obviously, and has been shown a little bit, but she just picks him up off the ground a little and kind of pushes into him. So exercise. How many of you exercise your goats? How do you exercise them?
We run them on a treadmill.
Run them on a treadmill. Okay, what else? How else do you exercise them?
Walk them around.
Walk them around, yep. Here's one way Ryder exercises his goats. I'll show you a couple different ways. We went over to the arena when it was empty one day. And he runs and they chase him. That's kind of the nice thing about goats, right? Is once they get kind of halter broke, they're pretty friendly and they don't really want to leave your side. So Ryder runs and the goats chase him. This is another way Ryder exercises his goats. Why not play soccer? Well, you have your goat, right? I mean, why not? So there are lots of different ways to exercise them. We walk them, we run them. Do we want to start exercising our goats the very same day we bring them home? How come? Jameson, how come?
Well, so because they're sorry.
You're good.
Because they're getting used to the environment, they might not want to come and snuggle up on you yet, but after time and after you spend time with them both a little bit, then they'll be willing to exercise with you.
Right. And we're also growing an animal, right? So when we very first bring them home, they're still pretty little, right? And so if we're trying to put weight on our animal and get them big, running them is kind of defeating the purpose, right? So we kind of want to grow our animal and get them big, and then we want to start toning them and making their muscles bigger. So we're going to grow them, and then we're going to tone them and exercise them to increase those muscles. I didn't have a picture or a video of my goats on the treadmill, but this is like what Jameson said, right? They walk and they run their goats on the treadmill just like these sheep. So we do forward, and we do forward for a couple of minutes, and we also go backwards for a couple of seconds or 30 or 45 seconds or a minute with our goats and our sheep. Fitting. Fitting is who likes to fit their goats? Who likes goat hair? I don't like goat hair. It's really sticky, don't you think? Does it stick everywhere and make you itch forever? Yeah, but it's important, right? Fitting is important. So these are just some of the supplies to be able to fit a goat. So we need, a lot of times we need a stand. So we can put our goat on the stand. We can wash our goats on the stand. We can clip our goats on the stand. We can fit our goats' legs on the stand. And then we need soap, right? We got to wash them to make sure they're clean so that our clipper blades don't get all gummed up. With goats, we use what's called a cover coat blade on goats because we don't want to shear them all the way to the skin like we do a sheep. We want there have to be a little bit of hair on there. We want to make sure their skin is conditioned. So we use some kind of conditioning or moistening cream or lotion. Sometimes people wrap goats' legs if they're chewing on their leg wool or they're chewing on their leg hair or they're chewing on their legs a lot. Sometimes people will wrap them to try and keep that hair on their legs because goat leg hair is a thing now. And that's kind of what these things down at the bottom, the powderful and the tail adhesive and the hocus pocus are all things you use to kind of pop out that leg hair, right, on the goats to make their legs and their bones look bigger. So here's some pictures of fitting, right? There's a doe on the stand in the middle. So does are tough, right? Those have lots of hair. So, and you're mostly just going to be doing weather goats. But in the first picture, Ryder just barely got done shaving off that goat. So his legs aren't really fit very good. And his tail's not quite done. They're blowing off the goat in the second one because she's been washed and she needs to be clipped. And then that last picture is kind of that picture of ready to go in the show ring, right? His body's clipped, he's clean, he doesn't have any black marks or green marks or hay in his head or any marks on his body. His legs are fit and he's ready to walk into the show ring. Success doesn't come from what you do occasionally, it comes from what you do consistently. Is your goat going to train itself? No. You win a show. I was just listening to a showmanship thing today and the judge said, you don't win the show in the barn or in the show ring, you win the show in the barn. So the more time you spend in the barn with your animals, the more that's going to pay off for you in the show ring. And then the final thing we'll talk about is showmanship. It's you've had your animal, you've fed your animal, you've taken care of your animal, you've grown your animal, you've fit your animal, and today's the day it's time to go into the ring. What is the most important ring rule for showmanship? Anybody?
Don't be abusive to your animal.
That's very important. Yes. That's just general husbandry. That we should never be abusive to our animals. But when it comes to showmanship is about you, right? It's about how well you can show your animal. So you've got your animal is as good as he's going to be. And now showmanship today is all about you. What is the number one rule in showmanship?
You need to pay attention to where the judge is at.
Know where your judge is. You had better know where that judge is all the time. Even when you're fixing legs on your goat, you better know where that judge is and you better know who he's looking at. You stare at that judge the whole time. From the minute you walk in the gate, they even say when you're lined up outside the gate, you should be staring at that judge. And if that judge looks at you, you make eye contact. So eye contact, look at the judge. Do we go in the show ring with our muck boots on? Do we go into the show ring with our boots tucked into our pants tucked into our boots? We go into the show ring like we're going into a job interview, really. Like we want to look our best. We want to impress that judge. When we walk into the ring, we want to think that judge to think, man, this kid is serious and this kid is here to win. Look how sharp that kid looks. You want your clothes clean. You don't want to wear the clothes that you washed your goat in 45 minutes ago and the knees are all wet and you got product all over your stuff. You don't want to wear the clothes that you cleaned out your pen in, right? You want to keep your nice white shirt nice and white and crisp and clean. So keep it hanging up until it's time to go into the ring. You go in with your clothes clean, your hair done, your show shoes on, and ready to go. Serious job interview. That's what you need to think about when you go into the show ring. Eye contact. Make sure your animal looks as good as you look. There's no black marks on them. There's no smudges on them. They're clean, they're presentable, and you're ready to go. So this is a friend of ours called Piper Liska. She's probably one of the best show people in the country right now. She's incredible. So if you ever have a chance to watch Piper at a show, watch Piper at a show because she's pretty impressive. She's there for business. I mean, she's dressed nicely. She's clean. Her animal looks great. She's making eye contact with the judge. She's got that animal looking the best she can right now. So she's doing everything she can. She's not looking at her mom. She's not looking at her dad. She's not talking to her neighbor. She's not looking down at her goat. She knows where her goat is. She knows where it's supposed to be. And she's there to win. Ryder right here is in, I think this was Arizona National, showing his doe. So what do you see the difference between Ryder and the kids around him?
The other kids are looking at their goat and he's not.
Right. Do those kids know where the judge is?
No.
So what's
Probably
another important part of showmanship is get your animal stuck as quickly as you can. Practice that at home. We give 10 seconds. You should have that animal set and stuck and done in 10 seconds. You should be up and looking at the judge in 10 seconds. If you can get your animal stuck in 10 seconds, you just bumped yourself to the top of a showmanship class. So we're huge on showmanship because not every kid can win a market show, but every kid has the possibility and the potential to win a showmanship class because showmanship is based on how hard you work. So get your animal stuck in 10 seconds and hold him there. Hold your animal there for a whole entire song, 3 minutes. Your animal shouldn't move. If your animal moves a leg at home, start over. So 3 minutes. We hold our animals for 3 minutes without moving before show day. And he has 10 seconds to get them set up. So those are big goals and those are hard to do. And it takes a lot of work to get to that point. But right here, Ryder knows where the judge is at. He's already looking at the judge saying, hey, look, here's my animal. I'm ready to go. And the people on either side of him, they don't have any idea where the judge is. So do you think that's going to stand out to a judge? That stands out to a judge. Again, here's Piper showing the front end of her doe, right? Or her goat right here in this picture. So that goat is stuck. That goat's legs aren't moving. Where do you think the judge is? Is the judge over here on the side looking at her goat like I'm taking the picture?
No.
No. Where's the judge?
Where she's looking at.
The front end of her goat, right? The
Yep.
person in front of her that I cropped out wasn't showing the front end of her goat. She was still bracing her goat like in these other two pictures. You think that stands out to a judge when you're in the right spot at the right time? You never want to be between your animal and the judge. You always want your judge to see your animal, not you. Does anybody have any questions on showmanship? We're going to look our best. Our animal's going to look our best. We're going to know where the judge is. If there's a class before you, watch that class so you know what the judge is looking for. You know how the kids walk into the ring and where they line up. All of those things are important in showmanship. So showmanship is the art of displaying your animal's best assets on the day that it decides to forget everything you've worked on and smiling the whole time. How many of you have had animals that totally forget what they're doing when you walk in the ring? Has anybody's goat been naughty in the ring? Or you guys got them stuck that good that they're just awesome?
Yeah, sometimes they're naughty.
Sometimes they're naughty. They get nervous just like you guys get nervous, huh? Yep. That says the only exhibitor you should try to be better than is the exhibitor you were yesterday. So the harder we try and the more work we put into it, the better we will be. Winning doesn't happen in the show ring, it happens in the barn. So spend more time with your animal, train it, spend time with it, bond with it, work with it, wash it, walk it, brace it, do all of those things before you ever hit the show ring. And then on show day, you get to show off all of that work that you've done. And believe me, it will pay off and the judge will notice. I think that's the end of my slideshow. Do you guys have any questions? No questions? None? I answered them all.
Yeah, you did a really good job of explaining section 2.
I don't have a question, but so we met some people last year at my first show, and they gave us some input. They're like, hey, when you're in the ring, you're kind of like an Oreo because you're like one part of the cookie. Your goat is the filling, and the judge is the other part of the cookie.
And nobody likes an Oreo with 2 cookies on one side, right? Yes, good analogy. Anybody else? Josie?
What season does your goat have to be born in?
Usually they're born December, January, somewhere right in there. Usually by now you've probably got your goat, so you want to pick them up like February or March, and they're about 60 days old when you pick them up. So they're born in December or January to pick them up in February or March.
Is there an age limit for how old they can be?
Usually they have to still have their milk teeth, so they have to be under a year old.
Okay.
Really quick before everybody disappears, if you did not type your name and what county you're from in the chat, make sure you do that so you get credit for being here if your county is counting it for member in good standing.
Well, thank you guys for all getting on tonight. And if you guys have questions, you can get a hold of me or anybody in your county with 4-H and extension, and we'd be happy to help you and answer your questions for you.